Welcome to Spiritual Shenanigans, the podcast where science meets spirituality, where we explore the mysteries of the mind and the vastness of the universe. If you're someone who is fascinated by the stars and intrigued by the power of the mind and the depths of human consciousness, then join us as we delve into the realms of astral travel, alien encounters, and share tools and tips for practical spirituality. Each week, we'll journey beyond the ordinary, exploring topics that expand our awareness. Whether you're a skeptic or a believer, a scientist or a seeker, Spiritual Shenanigans offers a playful space where open minds come together to explore the extraordinary. Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 5 of Spiritual Shenanigans. It's Saidah, and today I'm here with Ryan. Nujat and Jace are actually on vacation in Tenerife for Jace's birthday. We're so jealous. So it's just going to be Ryan and I today, and we're actually going to be diving much deeper into a book that we've mentioned quite a bit on the podcast before. We talk about it a lot actually in the astral projection episode. If you haven't heard that yet, you should definitely go check it out. It's our most popular episode so far. And we go into the book quite a bit in that episode. If you heard the episode, you'll know that it's actually the book that Ryan attributes to him spontaneously astral projecting after doing some of the exercises from it, even though he was actually a non-believer in astral projection at that point. So we're going to talk about that book, and we're also going to talk about 2 other books in the same trilogy by the same author, Franz Bardon, all of which Ryan says were extremely instrumental in his spiritual journey. So we're so excited for you to hear this. Let's get started. So I am actually currently reading Initiation into Hermetics, so I do have some background on it. I've just started reading it and I'm doing the initial exercises. So I can definitely weigh in here a bit as well. But let's start with, I guess, since all of these books are by Franz Bardon, and he's definitely was a very fascinating person. Let's get started with a little bit of background on Franz Bardon. Ryan, what can you tell us about him?
Bardon was a very influential 20th century magician. One of the most influential, I believe, along with Aleister Crowley and a few others. And what separated Franz Bardon from many others is he had a very interesting life. So he was stillborn, and survived, basically. And he was very, very sick as a child, spent, I believe, a couple of years in bedridden. He was very sickly. And at one point, he became basically somebody else. So when he was in his teenage years, he just became, they said his mannerisms changed and he became like a spiritual yogi, basically, that he just got so much spiritual knowledge just out of nowhere. And his father was also a Rosicrucian, so he had that training already, but he basically just overnight became a magical sensation. And he led a very interesting lifestyle. He was in Czech Republic and then moved to Germany, and where he was captured and put in concentration camp during the times of Hitler and Nazi Germany. And at one point, he used magic to escape, but he ended up getting caught again. But he led a very interesting lifestyle, and he has a series of books. One is an autobiography, loosely an autobiography. It's labeled as a fiction, but it's loosely about his own lifestyle. It's called Bardon, the Magician. And he has 3 other books that serve as a trilogy that should be worked in sequential order. The first, as we stated earlier, is Initiation into Hermetics. So this is a book that it outlines theory in the beginning and then several practices that you work in sequential order, and it basically turns you from, if you have no experience in magic whatsoever, it'll turn you into an adept by the time that you are done with it. So it's very comprehensive, and he doesn't hold back. So he really gets into it. It's very elaborate in a way that you have to do these rituals or these exercises every single day, but it is well worth it. So as I mentioned during the astral projection episode, I worked I worked this book in the beginning when I was just starting to meditate, and I didn't really expect much from it. I was a skeptic at the time. I was pantheistic, so I had an appreciation of the universe, but didn't really think there was anything more to it. I didn't know anything about the astral plane. I didn't believe in spirits or deities at the time. So I just worked the exercises. I did them, and after 4 months, I just spontaneously started to astral project. And so it is a very powerful initiation system. So if you do follow the exercises, no matter what you believe going into it, you're going to get results. And that's what this path is about. So getting results regardless of your belief system. Basically, regardless of what you believe, if you do certain things, you should get the same reproducible results. So that's what spiritual science is all about. One reason that I really recommend Franz Bardon, because he has the practices that for self-initiation that anyone can do them and get the same results. And right now, Saidah here is working it, and she can tell you some information.
So the initial exercises are kind of mostly about thought control and, controlling your mental state. So I will say, for somebody that is an extremely busy and active person, this book definitely takes a lot of dedication. So you have to be really willing to put in the time and commit to the practice, which, to be honest, I'm already getting a little bit nervous about. But I'm definitely going to try my best to stick to it, and try to make sure that I carve out the time, and obviously take it seriously, because as Ryan said, he has a very comprehensive system in place. He starts out with teaching you about the elements and how to recognize all of the elements within yourself. Initially, you work on thought control, and then also work on, I guess, your character, you could say, right? He wants you to basically try to find equilibrium within yourself with, managing all of the elements, the dark and the light within yourself. So there's a part of the exercise where you have to, kind of sit down with yourself and be, I guess, very honest about, your character, your character flaws, strengths, and weaknesses, and assign those to the elements. And I think, ultimately the idea is that you want to try to reach an equilibrium. So, Ryan, I actually have a question on that, because, obviously well, one thing I will say also that he mentions is that it's very important that you do the exercises in order. So, not to skip anything, not to skip around, to make sure that you do them the way that he's laid them out. But in the beginning, he basically breaks them down into, like, I believe it's mind, soul, and body, right? Mind, soul, and physical. So are you able to do the exercises in part one? Because there's 3 or 4 parts, I believe. Are you able to do them at the same time, like the mental exercises along with the physical and the soul exercises?
So what I did when I was working the system is I would take each chapter and then just do those exercises in that order from the chapter. And because it has exercises for different parts, I thought it was actually better to do them all together, because each one is going to work certain aspects of yourself. So like the soul aspects, the mind aspects, and the body aspects. So you do the different exercises sequentially, but chapter to chapter, there's going to be the soul one, the mind one, and the body one, and you could do them all at the same time, because that strengthens different aspects of yourself. So I think if you work everything, mind as well as the body together, I think that actually strengthens your going to get out of it the results.
Okay, that's good to know. Yeah, because that was actually my thought as well. So, I was a little bit confused, since he says to do them in order and to not go to the next one until you're done with the first. So that's actually good to know. And I think it does make sense that, I guess they all complement each other, right?
Yeah, and when you get to the other chapters, you're going to see how each chapter builds up on knowledge and experience from previous chapters. So each
Right.
one kind of builds up to the next level for each exercise. So you're going to see that as you go along.
being fully transparent here, I am, actually pretty far along in the book. I'm just reading ahead. I'm not, again, not doing the exercises out of order, but just reading ahead so I know what's coming. So yeah, like Ryan said, I believe there's three parts. At least I'm up to the third part currently, and yeah, each chapter builds up pretty extensively upon the previous chapter and the previous exercises. So yeah, again, I'm only in the first part of the exercises, the very initial thought control phase, and I can already tell you that it's not. And the thing is, it's not that the exercises themselves aren't, at least up to this point so far, they actually aren't difficult for me, because I think I mentioned this in one of the other episodes. I actually am pretty good with being able to control my thoughts. Obviously, as someone that's been meditating for a really long time, and also, it's just something that I do out of practice. If ever, thankfully, I rarely have issues falling asleep, but if ever I feel like it's taking me a little too long to fall asleep, I will literally just clear my head of all thoughts, and I can do it so quickly, and I'll immediately be able to fall asleep. So that's kind of like the first part of it, of, just being able to initially, like, just become aware of your thoughts and record them and remember them, and then eventually just be able to clear your head of any thoughts for, I think, starting with 5 minutes and going up to 10 minutes. But as I've read ahead in future chapters, it becomes much, much more interesting and intense. So let's talk about, I guess, kind of his approach to Hermetics. So can you kind of explain what the structure of the book is, and how he balances like theory and practice?
Yeah, so Franz Bardon used his own system. It's very contemporary in that it's not an ancient system. It's a modern system that he created based on his knowledge of other systems. But what's really unique about his particular system is the way it blends Eastern and Western philosophy and praxis. So he uses a lot of yoga, a lot of Raja yoga in his practice, but so, for example, he uses the elements, four elements, the concept of the tetragrammaton, the union of the spirit, the masculine and feminine side, the polarity. So, a lot of these concepts are Western, and the practices are kind of a blend of both Western and Eastern, because a lot of this mind control and a lot of these concentration exercises, they stem from Raja Yoga and some other Eastern practices. His philosophy and the practices he puts forth are all very westernized. So, in this way, what he brings forth is something completely new, but that's very effective, that builds on some of the best practices from both East and West.
Right. Yeah, I did see that, and I know he talks a lot about like breathing, and it's funny too, because he actually, at least in the part that I'm up to currently, the very beginning, as far as the body goes, he talks about practices such as dry brushing and cold
Or healing,
showers,
yeah.
right? Which, now it's funny, these things are all the rage right now, right? In like holistic health, everyone's into dry brushing, to open up your pores and your lymphatic system. And then the cold showers, obviously, for like anti-inflammation and, stress reduction, and just, getting your system moving and waking you up. And those are two of the practices, the initial practices that he tells you actually to continue to practice for the rest of your life. I know, Ryan, you weren't crazy about the cold shower part. I actually love it. I've been doing that forever, so I'm totally okay with that. But yeah, again, like you said, it's interesting. A lot of concepts cross over from both Western and Eastern.
Yeah, and just to see how relevant it is now, since you're saying like a lot of these things are actually fads right now, and he was writing this back in like 1940s, so he was way ahead of his time.
Right. And, like the dry brushing, for example, like crosses, so many different cultures. I know it's a big practice in Ayurveda, and then also, I believe also in Chinese medicine. But yeah, it's obviously something that, a lot of physicians are practicing, and he recommends as well. So also makes me realize that it definitely is an important practice. It's something that I used to be very consistent with, and I stopped doing. So I'm definitely going to get back into it now. So yeah, as you mentioned, he talks about a lot about the elements. That's kind of where he starts. Can you go into a little bit of detail, about what their significance is in Hermetic practice according to Bardon?
Sure, yeah. So when we talk about the elements in spiritual practice, it's not the periodic table of elements that would all be considered earth elements, everything that's heavy. It's based on the ancient system of elements. In this case, it's the Western, which includes four different elements. If you don't account, which is considered like the fifth element, Asia or consciousness. But the four main elements are fire, water, air, and earth. And very early on in his book, he has you take a look at yourself and try to balance these elements. And the way he does this is he gives you a list of emotions from that stem from different elements. And you have to basically catch yourself and be honest with yourself, and then see if it's done in a positive way or a negative way. And you kind of tally it up at the end of the day, like how many fire emotions, how many water, air, earth, and was it like a positive emotion, a negative emotion, or something neutral? And by doing that and tallying it up, you could see what your strengths and weaknesses are on on an elemental level. And you can work on that. You can balance that. So that's what he wants you to do right from the beginning. And that's part of the character strengthening part, because he wants you to really become a balanced human being, well-rounded. And the way he has you do this is to work on the elements within yourself and looking at your own emotions and how they relate to different elements. And to give a little bit more background, fire, you would say, would be a creative force, very fiery force, creative, intellectual. Well, intellectual could be air too, but very creative and well, you're reading this
Yeah,
now. Maybe you
thanks
could
for
add some more. But fire is
I
basically like the burning that you have inside,
Right. So,
wanting to take
and then as far
action.
as like negative, like jealousy, for example, I think
Mm,
that part was really interesting and actually, a good exercise to do. It just makes you more aware of your actions and behaviors. And I know he also said, talks about the importance of recording all of this and kind of keeping like a diary specifically for your schooling, as he calls it. I think the schooling of the magic spirit or something like that. Right. Did you do that?
yeah, so I wrote, that's when I basically started my dream journal back when I
Oh,
did this. So
nice.
my
Yeah.
my very first dream journal has a lot of these exercises in them, and then I move on into just like recording dreams and astral projections. But that's how I started off by using that, by journaling what I was going through step by step in this particular book.
Right. Yeah. So yeah, he wants you to, kind of keep a record of everything just so that you can look back on it and see the progress that you've made. So now I think the second chapter is when he starts talking about the senses, right? And developing your senses. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how, that comes into play?
Yeah, so that builds upon what you're going to do in the first, where you balance the elements within you. Like we talked about fire, but water would be a sensation of coolness or cold, and water has to do specifically with the emotions and the feeling body. Next is air, and air has to do with the mental plane and your thoughts in particular. And then finally, earth has to do with stability. Stability is heaviness. Those are the basics, but there's a lot more to it. But when you get into the senses, you're going to continue to work with the elements as well. But also with senses, you want to basically feel everything on dual layers. So
Right.
one thing that I thought was really interesting about the work that he has with the senses is that he makes you feel a sense without any stimulus.
Right.
And this
That's
really activates your third eye. So
yeah.
this, you're really sensing in the astral. You're learning how to sense in the astral.
I didn't really make that connection. I mean, I know obviously it starts off with him wanting you to visualize things and sense things with your eyes closed. And then he asks you to do it with your eyes open, which I'm assuming is what will prepare you for, I guess getting into that state in the astral
Yeah,
plane,
to kind
right?
of manifest something in front of you that based like totally based on your imagination at this point.
Right.
So you use your imagination in the beginning, but once you're astral projecting, then you'll be able to use those same faculties to see what's there in the astral and to kind of navigate your way through it. And it's not just seeing, but he talks about all of the
Oh,
senses. Like
yeah.
you feel, but he wants you to feel a sensation. He wants you to
Hear,
smell,
smell.
hear. Yeah. So you basically, and also positive and negative. So think of a
Hmm.
really good
Right.
smell and smell that for the next 5 minutes without break. And think of a really bad smell that you don't like and smell that for the next 5 minutes.
Right. And at the same time, you're also working on your concentration skills, right? Because he wants you
Yeah.
to visualize this or smell this without any interruption of
No,
thought.
yeah. Then and that's one of the reasons he has you do the mental exercises right from the beginning, where you're doing like controlling your own mind so that you don't have these breaks of thought. So,
Right,
yeah.
right.
So
So it all builds upon each
exactly,
other.
yeah. It gets to a point where you just are able to block out any thought from coming in. So standard meditation is when thoughts come in and then you just let them go. But the more you do his practices, that these thoughts won't even arise, that you can have total control over your own mind. And that's really important for these concentration exercises because you really need to do these things over an extended time to get the most benefits out of them. And that's something you could take to the astral too, because if your mind is too active in the astral, then you could either go into the dream state and kind of get out of that astral projection state and go into a dream, or you could just end up waking up. So to be grounded in the astral for a long period of time, you really need to work everything together, especially mind, concentration, visualization, imagination. All of these have to be worked together. And this is all really shown in the book. And this is something that the practices really help you with.
Right. Yeah, no, I can totally see how it all, ties together and how it prepares you for, being able to navigate the astral world. So it's really all very interesting. And again, like you had mentioned in our previous episode, obviously you just weren't even reading this book for the purposes of trying to achieve astral travel like I am, but you just spontaneously started to astral project, which obviously, attests to how powerful his exercises really are.
Yeah, so I thought it was basically just a book on meditation. So I thought that, well, there was a lot of stuff about meditation coming about scientifically and saying, oh, this really helps you relax and it's good for you, mindfulness. And so that's why I did it. And it just had those other effects that were otherworldly. And I talked about my guides, and they were speaking different languages that I didn't know, and all this crazy stuff was happening.
Really amazing. So yeah, I mean, I am definitely really excited to continue reading the book. And, like I said, there's definitely some exercises, as you go along that seem like they'll be a lot more challenging, especially when it comes to the senses and being able to visualize and, smell and really like project these things. But I think for me, the biggest challenge is going to be the time, like dedicating the time to it. So I'm definitely going to work on that and hopefully, plan to come back in a future episode and tell you guys about my experience with this book. But I think we should move on to book number two, right? So book number two in this, I guess, series is The Practice of Magical Evocation. Ryan, do you want to tell us a little bit about what that book is and, I guess how it follows up on initiation into Hermetics?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So Practice of Magical Evocation is a book on, like it says, which is bringing forth or summoning spirits. So you use all of the training that you get from the first book, Initiation into Hermetics, and you apply this in a way that you can use your magic mirror and other tools to bring forth spirits. Now, what he does, so he does this by planetary, basically. So he takes 360 different earthen spirits in the etheric realm. And he takes those and he gets sigils, unique sigils for every single one of them. So sigils are ways to connect with a particular spirit. So basically, once it comes in contact with a spirit, he asks them basically for an energetic signature that he could use to contact them in the future, and that's what a sigil is. Um, so the deity or the spirit, or in this case, the elemental spirits, are going to come to that specific geometric shape when it is meditated on, when it's written down and meditated on. So he did this to contact many different spirits. Like I said, 360 of the earth spirits by themselves, and that's just the etheric realm. And he also has several spirits of particular for the earth elementals, for the water elementals, aka mermaids, for the air elementals, sylphs or fairies, and then the fire elementals, which are the salamanders. So he starts with the elementals, and then he goes into planetary spirits. So first he delves into lunar spirits and gives a catalog of lunar spirits that you can contact, and basically a paragraph on all of them about what they do, what he learned from them, and how they can function and how they can help the magical practitioner. Then he goes on to Mercury spirits. So what's interesting about his Mercury spirits is that they are the Shem HaMefaresh angels. So for those who work with angels, all of his Mercury spirits, yeah, there are 72 angels of the Shem HaMefaresh. So you contact every single one of them in order, all 72, and he gives information about them that goes above and beyond anything that I've read about them in any other book. Like he goes really deep with them. Like he is able to really communicate with a lot of depth with these angels. So this is like a really, really interesting part of that book. And then he goes into the other planets like Venus, and he gives an example of a spirit that he conjured from Venus, an angel from Venus. And like it's really cool because he goes into the entire process, exactly what the angel said to him, and like it's really interesting dialogue between the two. He skips Mars because he basically says that Mars spirits are dangerous, and if you are at the level where you can call forth, like you can find them yourself. He does that with Saturn too. It is very complete in a way, though. He has a big catalog of spirits, and at the end, he has their sigils so that anyone could call them if they have enough magical expertise. So, and he gives a lot of this information in Initiation into Hermetics, as far as like building a magic mirror, what are the best metals to use. He talks about how to condense astral fluid. So a lot of this all of this is covered in Initiation into Hermetics, and you can find similar methods of evocation elsewhere. That's a pretty popular practice nowadays with people evoking spirits.
So, quick question, Ryan. Before we continue talking about the book, just because some people might not really understand it. So can you tell us what the difference is between evocation and invocation? Because I know most people, when they think of spirits, they think of invoking a spirit. So, what is the difference between what he's describing and what most people know as invoking, spirits?
So when you evoke a spirit, Evoke, you're creating a space in front of you. Like if you have an altar, you're creating a space, for example, within a triangle or within a circle or within the sigil itself. And you're basically inviting the spirit to come into that designated space. So a lot of people start with either a magic mirror, which Franz Bardon recommends, and a lot of other people use a triangle, like a magic triangle that is able to hold the energy of a spirit. So when you evoke a spirit, you're bringing it forth into that physical medium, like whether it's a triangle, a sigil, or a mirror. So that's evocation. Invocation is when you bring a spirit within yourself. So you're letting the spirit partially possess you in a way. That's what invoking is. You're bringing it into yourself. And then there's a third that's a mixture of both, which is transvocation. And that's where the spirit can go back and forth between you and the physical structure. So you could do a combination of both evocation and invocation, and that's called transvocation. So that's probably the most effective way, I think, because when you invoke, you get things that you don't get when you evoke, and vice versa with evocation and invocation. So transvocation would be working both at the same time, like basically having spirit come teach you a certain thing and then come within you too, so that you kind of feel it as well.
To be honest, I think I would be a little bit scared to feel the spirit and to invoke them within myself. But can you tell us, I'm sure this is what people are probably going to really want to hear about your personal experience with, putting some of this stuff into practice?
As far as the evocation,
Yeah.
yeah. So I have evoked a couple of spirits from the practice of magical evocation. So that's where how I started with. The thing I can mention though is that just because you don't actually see or feel a spirit doesn't mean that they're not there. You have
Oh.
to be able to perceive it. So it could be there, but you might just be missing it because you just don't have like that energetic signature, that tie to it to really understand. So that's one thing. So if you evoke a spirit and nothing happens, doesn't necessarily mean that you failed. It could just be that the spirit came, but you just don't have the ability yet to sense it subtly. You can invoke, and that's stronger because there you could definitely feel it. So I think, at least with me, I successfully invoked quicker than I successfully evoked
Um,
because you could feel the sensation within yourself when you invoke because it's part of you. When it's evoking, like I said, it's external. So you might
mhm.
miss those subtle signs. And that's why, to me at least, evoking is a little bit harder. But also, in my case, I don't care if a spirit comes possessing me.
I think that's one way that we're very, very different because I don't think I'm quite there yet. I think I would probably start with evoking if I decide to go to delve into book number two. For those of us that are brave enough to try this, I'm sure there must be a ton of preparation that goes into it, obviously on a physical level, mental, and spiritual. Can you tell us about, either, I guess, what Bardon's approach was to that or what you personally did when you started, trying to put these into practice?
Yeah, so with evocation, Bardon gives a lot of caution because he doesn't want to recommend dealing with spirits and then having people just like get hurt by them. So the spirits that he includes in his book are generally very positive. He invokes a lot of angels and elementals, but even there, he cautions the reader not to get too caught in because like he especially was weary of like some of the mermaids or water elementals, especially if you're a man, that you could be seduced by them and then basically you can get yourself in a lot of trouble.
Oh,
So
wow.
he cautions against he that's one of the things about character development too. Like he wants you to have a good character because I mean you see this now
Right. You could use it
in
for,
yeah, like you see now, like when you even look on YouTube and listen to podcasts, like there's a lot of people that do get into these practices and they basically lose their mind. So
right.
like this is all over the place. Like you see this a lot. So and if you talk to people who do this and there are cases like you could see people that just aren't stable and they just get more unstable and they just like go mad from doing it. So you need to really have a strong foundation and this book actually helps get you that foundation and it starts you with spirits that are more gentle than some other spirits that people start with. Like you'll find some other books that say just jump into working with some of the most aggressive spirits there are and
Yeah.
without any formal training, without any working on your ethics and morality. And that's a recipe for disasters. But the way he puts it forth, it's a lot safer than doing that. Like he has all of these precautions and he basically deals with spirits that have your best interest at heart for the most part.
Mhm.
So Like it's a lot safer. It's a good path to start with. I'm glad I started with this path because there's a lot of paths that don't have the same precautions, and there's more chance for a lot of problems happening.
Yeah, I know you've told us some really crazy stories about people, in the spiritual space that have definitely gotten themselves in a lot of trouble, trying to evoke certain spirits. And yeah, I mean, I would imagine not even just, as far as what you said, Ryan, but I think the character development thing also, people with major character flaws that they need to work on, could potentially use this for, corrupt purposes or manipulative purposes, right? So I'm sure that's part of it too, like why he wants you to make sure that you have good moral character and a balanced emotions within yourself.
Yeah, just look at a couple of years ago, the big thing that was on the news. It was more in Britain because there was somebody that was a follower of a spiritual writer, a very famous guy that had his YouTube channel, had his own order, and there was a guy that followed him and made a pact, and the pact was that I think he would win the lotto or something if he killed like 6 people a year. And
Oh my God.
he went to a park and murdered 2 people, sisters. And like this was just yeah, it was the beginning of the end for the guy that won that was the supposed teacher. But I mean that's the type of thing that you can see from people that really fall in this path.
Right.
Like if they don't have good guidance, then you could really become like a psycho. And I've experienced people that are like that as well. Like it's more common than you would think. So that's
Oh
why
yeah.
it's really important to be ethical in this and basically know yourself.
Right. And I think that's also, reasons like that are why the occult practices have such a stigma attached to them. Especially when you hear stories like this on social media or on the news. So, on that note, does he also talk about any strategies for like protecting yourself, any symbols or prayers or anything like that? Or cleansing rituals, protecting your space and your energy. I assume you also want to protect your space, right? Like not just yourself.
Oh yeah, so that's a given. So you could there are a lot of different ways that you could protect your space. So what Bardon does, with his, it's more like internal. So he talks about like impregnation. You could basically just come into a room and impregnate it with your vibration, with your energy to kind of alchemically transmute, being powerful enough to be able to change the atmosphere around you.
Oh wow. Yeah, I mean, I guess that would make sense with this whole approach. Like he really it seems like he really wants you to be in control of everything, right? Like rather than relying on external sources to protect you, like most of us are used to like praying to someone or something, using certain objects to cleanse your space. I guess he's trying to, really help you spiritually develop yourself to the point where you can accomplish everything yourself.
Exactly. Yeah. So while he does issue a lot of precautions, at the same time, he wants you to be able to clean the area yourself without really relying too much on external things.
Wow, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Honestly, like hearing about the second book really makes me have a much bigger appreciation for the first one. And even like as trivial as some of the exercises might seem, like it all really just makes sense. And they all, you could see how they build upon each other and get you to the point of being able to practice this much more intense work in his second book. On a final note on this book, on the flip side, as far as using it for good or practical uses, how can you use evocation, for example, to maybe like gain knowledge or heal? We had talked about with astral travel and dreams in previous episodes. Can you similarly use evocation in the same way?
Oh, yeah. So the sky is the limit. Like these spirits have knowledge that surpasses what humans know. So the hardest thing I think is to really bring that knowledge within yourself because they have to speak to you on a level where you are. So it's basically on you, the onus is on you to get to a higher level where you can understand and put into practice higher realities. So that, and one thing about Bardon is that, like, in his synopses, his paragraphs on the spirits, you could definitely tell he's on a higher level because you don't see stuff like that written anywhere. Like it talks about like materializing and dematerializing and controlling the elements and causing or stopping rainstorms, stuff like that.
Right.
Like,
Stuff that you hear about in like fairy tales that you
yeah, yeah, like so these spirits have really advanced knowledge, a lot of them. So they could really teach humans so many different things. It's really up to us to be on the level where we could receive it, first of all, and interpret it in a way. Like we hold ourselves back more than anything, with our own conditioning because we're conditioned. We think based on what we experience in our body. Don't see ourselves as a spiritual being as much as we see ourselves maybe a little bit above an animal just walking around trying to make sense of a physical world. So, like basically, with evocation, if you can get past your own conditionings and get past your own beliefs, your limiting beliefs, and just like try to ask the spirit for like the highest knowledge that they can give you that you can understand and interpret, then I mean the sky is the limit. You could really learn a lot, and it's great for spiritual growth and evolution on the path too.
Wow, amazing. So yeah, basically being able to transcend your 3D reality, which, I think, like you said, the problem is just that that's really what we're conditioned to believe, that we have all these limitations. So yeah, I mean, I'm actually really excited to hopefully get through initiation into Hermetics and make my way to this second book, especially, of course, when you started telling me that he communicates with all 72 angels. I have to read this book next. So, is there anything else you want to say about this, or should we get into the last one, the key to the true Kabbalah?
Yeah, we can start talking about that now.
Okay, awesome. So this is the third book in the series, and again, like Ryan mentions, according to Bardon, definitely important that you follow, I guess the orders. So initiation into Hermetics, practice of magical evocation, and then this would be the third one. So I'm assuming that that makes it also the most advanced one. Is that right?
Yeah, so if you think initiation into hermetics is advanced and the practice of magical evocation is advanced, then wait till you see the the key to the Kabbalah, the true key to the Kabbalah. That's like super advanced. So that's probably the most difficult to talk about because it is so advanced. But it's really so okay. So I'll do my best to try. So because I have worked a lot of I worked enough of the book to really have an idea. So one thing I could say, so he bases his work around the alphabet. So it's a little different in that he was from Czech Republic and he used the German alphabet.
Right.
So there's slight differences, not many, but there are some slight differences in their alphabet versus like the traditional Latin-derived English alphabet. So that's one thing that might be a little difficult for somebody in the West. So I did my best to try to translate it and come up with all of these correspondences. So it took me a really long time, but I did work a lot of this book, and in doing so, I tried to make it compatible with the English alphabet so that I could really bring forth some of these keys into into something that I'm more used to. So this book is, so we know what Kabbalah is. Kabbalah is an esoteric Jewish system that's been around for, they say countless centuries, but as far as we know, as far as what has been really explicated in writing, a lot of the written books on the Kabbalah are within 1,000 years old. So that's where we get a lot of our knowledge. A lot of the books on Kabbalah first started coming out into the public's eye, like around like the 1400s, 1500s. So Kabbalah is a really advanced system, and I've touched upon Kabbalah because that's where you get the tree of life concept.
Right.
So there's tree of life in a lot of different cultures, but Kabbalah really goes into depth about what the tree of life is. So that is in Kabbalah. A lot of the Western magical traditions, For example, Golden Dawn, which is one of the most popular, they use Kabbalah. They use Kabbalah, they use Hermeticism. They kind of blend a few things in. They use some Egyptian magic, but Kabbalah is a really important part of Golden Dawn, which is kind of the benchmark for modern Western magic. So a lot of the systems that stemmed from Golden Dawn, which are most of them, also use Kabbalah by default because they get their information mostly from Golden Dawn. So there's a plethora of orders, and they all have some knowledge of the Kabbalah. It might be a little different from the original Jewish version, and for that reason they call it Kabbalah with a Q instead of a K, just to like a whole thing about like it might be some differences from the original traditional Jewish Kabbalah. So enter Franz Bardon in the 20th century. So I'm not exactly sure where he got his knowledge of Kabbalah from, but his is really intricate, and his is on a level that you could tell is like beyond the physical. So so in Initiation into Hermetics, we talked earlier about how he talks about the mental, the soul exercises, and the physical body exercises. True Key of the Kabbalah is similar to that, only you add a more like a etheric, not etheric, but more like a so you have an Akashic level, which is the highest level, and then you have the lower levels that we just talked about. So there's 4 different levels here, and this goes nicely with his initial statements in Initiation into Hermetics about the Tetragrammaton, the 4. So the Tetragrammaton is the fourfold name of God, so people know that as Yahweh or Yod He Vav He. So masculine, feminine, or father, mother, son, daughter. So there's a lot of different codes within the 4 names of the fourfold name of God. But it's like a mixture of polarities, masculine and feminine. And True Key of the True Key of the Kabbalah, that plays upon this using the vibrations from sound. So he vibrates different sounds into the 4 different spheres. So first he starts off with just each letter of the alphabet. So each letter so for us, it's just a way of communication, and it's really random in many ways, like the way we string letters and words together. But the way the original Kabbalists designed the alphabet, each letter has its own vibration. In the original Hebrew alphabet, there are 22 letters and 22 vibrations. And each of those represents a specific number. So that's gematria, or modern day numerology. And it even represents its own realm of existence. So it's way beyond just a random way of pronouncing something. So they really go into the sound, the vibration, and and also another thing that Bardon stresses is a color associated with that vibration, because each color is just a unique reflection of a wavelength of light. So we're dealing with light and we're dealing with sound. So we're using the letters to get the sounds that help us to really go into the keys of creation, light and sound. And this is why he starts with just one letter, and then he starts combining different letters together. So first you understand everything about that one letter, the vibration, the sound that it makes, the color associated with it, and just the energy that you feel with the energy signature. And then from there you go into a double letters, and then you pronounce each of the letters together to create a new unique combinatorial sound. And based on that, you're able to string some different sounds together to create a new vibration. And then you go into the 3, and then after the 3, then you go into 4. So these act as codes by which you could speak certain levels of reality into manifestation. So that's what this book is all about. And if it sounds complicated, it's because it is. So it's
I was going to say, I don't even know where to begin to unpack that because, wow. So is it kind of, I mean, I guess from my layman's terms understanding of it, is it kind of like a shortcut, I guess you could say, to being able to like do magic essentially or put things into practice? Or what is the ultimate goal, I guess, of using these mantras or
Yeah, so
letters?
it's manifestation, pure and simple. I
Okay.
wouldn't say it's a shortcut because it is very complicated,
Right, right.
but appears very convoluted on the surface and it is very difficult in many ways, but it's also very powerful too. It's a very powerful way of manifesting. And it does work, but it's also something that's very difficult. So it's something and that's the reason why it's the third book. You need to go through all this other stuff for the first three books to really get any understanding of it.
Right, right. So the practical application of it, is that like the last step
Basically,
in your,
yeah. Yeah, and you want to bring forth from the different levels of reality because we talked about the different planes, like starting with
right.
the highest and then going to the lowest, which is the earth. So you could kind of vibrate sounds into, and at this point, you're gonna really understand like what vibrations lead to what effects, because that's in
Right.
the beginning where you're looking at each different letter, what they represent. So in Kabbalah, each letter is ruled by something, whether it's air, fire, water, earth, or the zodiac signs like Libra, Aquarius, or the planets, Saturn, Jupiter. So all of these have an effect on the letters themselves. So there's so many different correspondences. So that's one difficult thing with True Key of the Kabbalah because he kind of expects you to know a lot of the correspondences ahead of time. But even if you just do the exercises, I'm sure it's still gonna work. Like even if you don't really understand why it's working, but there's a
Okay.
whole science to it that if you study Jewish Kabbalah or even like the Golden Dawn system or Western styles of magic, they all talk about this. So there are a lot of correspondences as above, so below that really will
Mm,
help you in deciphering these codes. And remember, each letter is one of 22 different pathways.
wow.
And they're called, and there's 22 of them in the Jewish alphabet, and that represents the 22 different tunnels
To your
in the
life.
tree of life. And each tunnel is represented by one specific letter. So each
Mm,
letter has all of these correspondences that are unique to that one letter. And beyond that letter, you can access a certain astral gateway that
mm.
is unique to these particular properties that are being expressed outwardly by vibrating the sound of that letter.
Wow. So is this something that you have to do out loud or can you do it in your head? Like,
Both. Yeah. So
oh,
you start. It's always good to start. I mean, he does talk about this, like what to vibrate out loud, what to say in your head.
oh,
In general, as a rule of thumb, you start by saying things out loud. So that's what really gets you into the habit. But then after a while, you just do it very lightly, and then you could just do it in your head. And
oh.
there's different applications to and reasons to do all of them. But once you really master, then you could do this in your head, and you could do it like as many number of times, and this really allows you to resonate on higher levels too.
That's why, like Ryan said, it's important to follow a system like Bardon's, where you really learn to work on yourself and your spiritual development before you start attempting some of these really intense practices. And last question on the key to the Kabbalah. I know he talks about sigils too, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I know that's something that you use a lot in your own practice and rituals.
Yeah, so that's actually from the practice of magical evocation, and sigils are basically signatures for the spirit. So he gives a catalog of sigils at the back of practice of magical evocation, so that anyone could come in contact with the spirit. And then there are a lot of like known deities, known spirits, angels, demons that have their own sigils that are widely used as well. So those
Okay.
are the signatures of the spirit.
Okay, so
So
that's more
there's
book two.
sigils,
Sorry.
yeah. Hindus have mantras where you
Right,
basically say a
right.
certain mantra and that resonates with a particular spirit and
Mhm.
that comes. Typically in the West, we use sigils though. So sigils are like written seals. They're like geometric shapes and you basically can contact them through there because it's like a certain energetic signature to each of these sigils that makes it easier to call in that specific energy from that spirit.
Right. So actually going back to the mantras really quick before we wrap up, I was actually thinking that too when we were talking about, the key to the Kabbalah and the different sounds and vibrations. Would you say that like the Kundalini mantras are similar to that and what they can achieve?
Oh, absolutely. So that's something that's more guarded, I think. Like there's not really, like typically with Hinduism, they give a lot of information, but the really juicy stuff, you need to really go to a guru and train under them to
Right.
get like the really hardcore mantras. But it's a similar of similar properties. So like the way I just described, using the vibrations of the letters you could do the same thing with mantras in either manifestation, controlling the elements,
Mhm.
calling deities. So again, sky's the limit. So it's a different type of practice, but it works essentially the same way.
Wow. So that's a lot of information on all three books. And, like I said, I am definitely really, really, really interested in progressing on my spiritual journey and hopefully getting through all of them. How would you say, Ryan, that these books have impacted your spiritual journey? I mean, I know I hear you talk about them all the time.
Yeah, so I mean, it really got me started and it opened my eyes to a world that I didn't think existed. Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I mean, I was spiritual in a sense for somebody that was skeptical, but still, like everything to me was just basically what you can sense or what you could see, and like I didn't really think that there was anything beyond the physical universe and the
Mm.
processes that make up the physical universe. So these books really opened my eyes and allowed me to see firsthand that there is more to life than just what the senses can sense. So they really allowed me to see that there is something spiritual and start remembering like the my history, my soul history, because that's something that you kind of like forget until you get to a certain point, then you start remembering stuff, especially if you really pay attention to your dreams and you could start astral projecting, then it starts all clicking together. So this was like the first thing that really set all of this in motion for me. So that's why they have a special place in my heart, and I really want to recommend them to people that are interested in first of all knowing whether this is real or not, and also to advancing their own spiritual evolution. So one thing I say, like if you're like for people who are skeptics, just try it. Just if you have the time and energy, and you really do want to know if this is real or not, then just do these exercises continuously for however long that it takes. And
Yeah, I know he stresses that he lays the book out in such a way that, anyone should be able to easily, well, I won't say easily, but anyone should be able to put these into practice. And from my experience reading it so far, like I said, I think the biggest thing is obviously your level of commitment and dedication. So you really have to be committed to the practice and open to and able to dedicate time to it because it definitely is not going to come easy. It's something that will take a lot of time and a lot of practice. So, any other advice or warnings or tips, Ryan, that you would give to someone that's, just starting to explore these books like myself?
yeah, so just be diligent and don't skip ahead because that's going to mess you up because you want to really do establish the foundation first. Because like the better you start off with, even if some of the things do still need to do these exercises because ultimately it's going to help you save time. Because if you just jump into the hard stuff, then it's difficult to succeed without a foundation. So do the foundational work, do it until you really have a good grip on it because then that'll save you time later on and you could really succeed where in the aspects that are harder that you really want to succeed the most in. So that's my recommendation, just to stick with it even if it seems like, oh, I could do this, just still do it anyway until you really feel comfortable to move on to the next step because that having that foundation is really so important to succeed later on in this work.
Right. Yeah, and I could definitely see, even just us talking about the the book and talking about the next two books in the trilogy, how everything just really builds upon what came before it. So yeah, it really makes me have a real appreciation for his process, I guess you could say, in the way that he recommends that you put things into practice. So I'm definitely excited to continue reading Initiation into Hermetics and then hopefully make my way to the next two books. So next time that we talk about this topic, hopefully I'll be telling you about my astral travels. So thank you so much for listening to this episode. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and hopefully you'll go check out these books for yourself. Again, whether you're a skeptic or a believer, if it's something that you're curious about, whether you just want to know if it exists, or you want to try and explore astral travel, or explore some of these more intense practices that Bardon talks about, I would highly recommend giving these books a read. If you enjoyed this episode, we would really appreciate if you subscribe, leave us a rating and review. And until then, we'll see you next time, and Nujat and Jace will be back. Thank you.